Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. You guys have sent in some really fascinating stuff for us to look at. And today we're going to be diving deep into one narrative that explores a lot of different things, actually. Um, Gratitude, social mobility, and the way that our lives can just kind of end up taking these very different paths.
Yeah, definitely. It's a story that centers around this chance encounter. And what we really want to do today is kind of unpack that meeting, try to understand the different viewpoints of the people involved, and just think about, what this whole thing tells us about how we see success and how we think about helping others and being helped.
Okay, so jumping right into it, the story actually starts in kind of an interesting setting, a fancy five-star hotel that's hosting a seminar on, get this, poverty. It's this contrast,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. And the narrator actually points that out too, like, making us think about how we talk about poverty and how sometimes those discussions happen in places that are so far removed from the actual experience of it.
Exactly. And then, boom, we have this unexpected reunion in the hotel lobby. The narrator runs into a guy he knew from school 30 years ago. This guy, Suresh, is decked out in an Armani suit, smells like expensive cologne, on his phone, talking about some big deal, and he's got this Mercedes parked right outside.
It's one of those moments, right, where you don't recognize someone at first because so much has changed, especially when their life has taken such a different turn than yours. Right away, you get the sense that Suresh has done really well for himself, like financially speaking, which makes the contrast with the narrator even more obvious.
Totally. And right after they say hello, Suresh doesn't waste any time in giving his opinion on the narrator's career. He's a teacher and a social worker, and Suresh basically says, and I'm paraphrasing here, I felt bad for you. You would have been great in business.
What jumps out there is how quickly Suresh judges and how he's kind of got this limited view of what it means to do well, right? Like money is the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
But then the narrator says something really interesting, and I think it's worth repeating. He says, doing what you like is freedom. Liking what you do is happiness. It's like a whole different philosophy, right?
It really is, and it sets up this whole exploration of like what success really means and how we find fulfillment, right? Anyway, after this first meeting, Suresh offers the narrator a ride in his Mercedes, and we start to see just how well he's actually doing.
Yeah, we learn about all these businesses he's got going, medical transcription, training people for software jobs overseas, even something about preparing teachers to work in the UK. It's
Mhm.
clear he's got this business sense, and he's ambitious.
And then he invites the narrator to breakfast at his farmhouse. Even just the way this is arranged shows you how wealthy he is. He's got a secretary who handles the scheduling, and a car is sent to pick up the narrator. It's like a whole operation.
And the description of the farmhouse itself is really something. 60 kilometers outside of Bangalore, next to the Kaveri River, surrounded by forest, 20 acres of land. It's like this paradise, with organic fruits and vegetables, a gym, a swimming pool. It's a world away from where they both came from. The narrator even compares it to a palace.
Yeah, it's not even his only place. Suresh also has a house in the city, in Indiranagar. The farmhouse is for weekends and special guests. Like, that's how well off he is.
And, the fact that the breakfast happens at this farmhouse, it's not just a meal. It's kind of like Suresh is showing off his success, even if he's not doing it on purpose. But then the story shifts, and we start to learn about Suresh's background, where he came from.
Right, the narrator remembers how different Suresh's childhood was. He grew up poor, his dad was a cook, and it was really tough for him to get an education. This is where we see how important other people's kindness was for him.
Absolutely. It wasn't just Suresh's own hard work that got him where he is. Someone, we don't know who, gave him a place to live while he was studying. His college gave him a full scholarship. His classmates chipped in so he could buy books. Even the librarian let him borrow extra books. Like, there were all these people helping him.
And when you ask Suresh how he became successful, he talks about hard work, yeah, and talent, but he also says he learned how to be aggressive and how to make connections. Oh, and he mentions that he married Veena, whose father helped him a lot with his businesses.
So he's telling this story about how he made it on his own, but he's also admitting that he got some pretty big help along the way, especially from family. And when he talks about being aggressive, it makes you wonder if he was always pushing to get ahead, maybe even if it meant stepping on other people. It might explain some of his attitudes later on.
Interesting point. He also talks about how he's taking care of his family, buying land, shops, building houses, making sure everyone has two cars. It's like he feels responsible for them, but then you compare that to how he feels about the people who helped him when he was younger.
And that's where the story really gets interesting, right? It's about these two different ideas of what it means to help and to be grateful. Suresh is actually pretty dismissive of the people who helped him in college. He hasn't stayed in touch with them, he never went back to visit, and he's got this explanation for why they helped him that's kind of cynical.
Yeah, he says they just wanted to feel good about themselves or they wanted to be able to say, I helped that guy become successful. Like, he doesn't believe there was any real kindness involved. It's kind of disturbing, especially when you think about how much they actually did for him.
It makes you wonder, how do people see acts of kindness? Does it make them feel good about themselves, or does it threaten their ego? Maybe Suresh doesn't like to think about needing help. Maybe he wants to believe he did it all himself.
And then there's this part where he finds out that Mr. Rao, the guy who gave him a place to live, is having money troubles. And Suresh's reaction is just cold. He basically says Mr. Rao deserves it because he helped all these unwanted students.
It's really hard to hear that. I mean, here's someone who showed him so much kindness, and Suresh has no empathy at all. It's like he's completely forgotten what it was like to struggle and to need help.
It's the total opposite of what the narrator thinks about helping others. For him, real generosity means helping people without expecting anything back, helping them become independent. It's a much more selfless way of thinking about it, right?
Absolutely. The narrator actually says that being grateful is the most important education you can get, which is something Suresh seems to have missed entirely. It's like
Yeah.
there's a whole different kind of intelligence, and emotional intelligence and ethical intelligence that's just as important as being smart in business or whatever.
And then there's this metaphor about climbing a ladder and kicking down the rungs below you.
It's powerful, right? It's like
Yeah.
sometimes when people become successful, they lose their empathy, they forget where they came from, and they forget who helped them along the way.
And you can see this lack of gratitude in other parts of Suresh's life, too. He mentions that his daughters are studying in England, learning about Indian culture and home science, which is like interesting in itself. And he's already thinking about finding them husbands, but they have to be well off and handsome and preferably able to support themselves or willing to live with him.
Yeah, it's all about status and control for him, even with his own kids.
And even little details like how breakfast is served on silver plates and the way Veena, his wife, is described as looking young for her age. It all adds to this feeling that maybe Suresh is all about appearances, about showing off his success, but underneath, it's kind of empty.
And in the end, the narrator feels really uncomfortable. He loses his appetite. It's like, even with all this wealth and success, there's something missing in Suresh's life, something important. Yeah, the narrator's feeling kind of sick to his stomach.
Mm.
He can see what Suresh has, but he can also see what he doesn't have, and it's not something you can buy.
So, to kind of sum up this whole deep dive, we've got this really stark contrast. Suresh has achieved a lot materially, but he doesn't seem to appreciate those who helped him get there.
And that brings us to a question for you, our listeners. What do you make of this whole story? What does it tell you about helping others, about being grateful, about how we see our own journeys and the people who have been a part of them?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Maybe success isn't just about money or possessions. Maybe it's also about recognizing and appreciating the kindness we've been shown. That might be the most valuable thing of all, and it's something that Suresh seems to be missing. We'll leave you with that to think about. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.